Welcome to Upticks. I'm Jake Falcon.
And I'm Corey Bittner. We're the founders of Falcon Wealth Advisors and your co-host for Upticks.
Today is our 44th episode, Avoiding Risk.
We're talking about what sets us apart, risky investments, and questions worth asking.
Okay, Corey, so to kick off our financial planning portion of today's show, I wanted to talk about some things that we do that are quite a bit different than maybe some other financial advisors out there in Kansas City. And I wanted to talk more about our planning process. So maybe you can kind of go into what a typical initial meeting looks like for you when you're meeting with somebody that's looking to work with Falcon Wealth Advisors.
Sure. So really, ideally for every new potential client that we onboard or that comes on board to work with us here, we usually like to take the time in a first meeting that's usually an hour to an hour and a half here in our office just to go through a series of questions that we're trained to ask to get them thinking more about retirement. So thinking beyond just working. And the idea there, though, is obviously we're collecting the financial information that's going to be pertinent.
Right, that's necessary.
401k, Social Security, pensions, etc. However, during that meeting is when we really want to kind of try to drill a little bit more deeply and figure out, what's important to someone. Why did you take the time to save all of this money and make the sacrifice? If you're transitioning in that next phase of your life, what do you envision? And during that meeting, we try to take the time to just talk about that before we start talking about how we're going to go invest your money or, whatever else it might be. It's just an opportunity for us to learn more about the client, them to learn more about us, and then figure out what's important to them and whether or not it would be a good fit.
Right. So it's a qualitative and a quantitative discussion. And I think a lot of other advisors, what I've seen out there is they'll typically send out maybe a questionnaire to their potential clients beforehand, or they'll just be very analytical and just really take down the notes. Or frankly, a lot of times they'll waste the person's time and not really make that meeting that, much, it might not be that meaningful, that initial meeting. And so I think one of the things that you and I do that are really well is that our clients are our friends. And it's really about starting a relationship. So we want to go over briefly our backgrounds, but really it's more about learning about the individual and what's important to them when they're working with a financial advisor. Yeah, we're a fiduciary. I mean, we've pounded the table on that a lot. If anybody's working with somebody that works at a wirehouse or some of these brokerage firms, I don't understand really why, because at some point you've got to look at yourself in the mirror and be like, is my advisor just selling me products? And why am I continually, doing that or buying into that? So again, but there's a lot of fiduciaries out there. So again, something that sets us apart is that we're looking to establish a relationship with our clients, and it's not always a good fit. And we're not a one-size-fits-all group. Our clients are intelligent, they're hardworking, and they're nice people. We don't work with any people that are rude to us, and we're not certainly rude to them either. Again, it's a friendly relationship. You and I have spent a lot of time studying retirement planning. We have our credentials. We're chartered retirement planning counselors. And like you said, we take down, 401k information. We certainly help with Social Security, IRAs. We look at their debt. We look at their mortgage if they have one. We talk about insurance. We talk about all the stuff that all the other advisors do. But I think what's really important to us is that we really look to bond with our clients so that we can be there for them when they need us.
Yes.
And I think that's very important.
Agreed. The one thing I was going to just add to that, because what sort of tells me about the state of people planning for retirement and talking with other advisors is I know, for instance, if I sit down with a new potential client for the first time, because there's been several of those meetings that I've had more recently, maybe it just feels this way, but people come in and they kind of want to say, here's what I've got, what do we need to do? And almost as if like they've sat down with someone else who said like, okay, show me your statements. Let's talk about your finances. Where it's like, okay, let's take a step back.
Right.
We're going to get to that, but let's talk about all the other stuff that's important too.
Yeah, exactly. Because, no two people are alike. And so we can have clients that work at the same company, have the same amount of money, but their goals and objectives and their concerns are completely different.
Yes.
And that's one of the joys of our jobs is that our clients are all different, and we take pride in learn and getting to know what's important to them, so that we can deliver that. And that's really what we're in business to do. So, some quick takeaways is we would encourage you to obviously first and foremost you should be working with a fiduciary, which that's typically an independent advisor who's legally bound to only act in your best interest. Also, you should look to have a relationship. You should trust your advisor, and they should trust you.
Yes.
And it shouldn't be this uncomfortable situation that's something that you have to do once a year or twice a year or however often you meet. Or some advisors never meet with their clients, right?
Right.
Or maybe it's just a phone call once a year. I mean, again, we meet with our clients twice a year. It doesn't matter your account value. We don't tier our practice. A lot of advisors will do that. They'll meet with their bigger clients more often, and their smaller clients they may never meet with. We don't believe in that either. We like to give everybody the same level of service. And, we care. We have a relationship. Our clients, most all of my clients have my mobile phone number, right? And they can text me if they need a question or have something that they need to talk about. And we'll certainly pick up the phone or communicate via email or whatever's important to them. And that's, we enjoy that. Our clients are our friends. And I think that is something that definitely sets us apart from your typical financial advisor.
Definitely.
All right, good. So our second portion, we wanted to talk about risky investments. And I wanted to talk about the risks associated with exchange traded funds or ETFs, because they're a very popular investment right now because of their low cost, but we consider them very dangerous and risky. So why don't you kind of clue in our audience in here and maybe give a brief definition of what they are, and we can go into why we don't like them.
Okay, good. I'm glad you brought this up because this is a good thing, I think, for us to talk about. So first off, at a very high level, just to define what an exchange-traded fund or an ETF for short is, it's an investment product that is manufactured by some type of investment company that basically packages together, maybe it's 500 different stocks or whatever it might be. And usually an exchange-traded fund, though, it's passively managed, meaning there isn't really anybody manage it, and typically they're designed to mirror a specific index. So perhaps the Dow Jones or the S&P 500 or the NASDAQ or the 10-year bond or whatever it might be. And the idea is it's really just designed to do whatever those indexes do.
Gotcha. So it's a packaged product. Mm-hmm. It can be comprised of whatever the underlying investments are of that index, mm-hmm. but then there's nobody really managing it.
Exactly. And the idea there is if the S&P 500 goes up 10%, the idea is that fund in all probability is going to be up somewhere in the neighborhood of 10%, less the costs associated with owning it.
Plus, if you're paying an advisor fee,
yeah.
It'll be down. So if the S&P's up 10%, you're an exchange traded fund, it should be up somewhere around 10%. But if your advisor's charging you 1%, well, now you're only going to be up around 9%.
Right.
Roughly.
Plus the cost of the fund.
Yeah, and the funds also aren't free typically. There's some free ones coming out there onto the market.
Yeah.
But typically they do have some sort of small internal hidden fee associated with it also.
So the idea there, though, is that, in theory, that's when the market's doing well, right? And you're just sort of participating in what the market does, it's not a bad way to go. But really where the risk is associated is the downside, right? If the S&P 500 pulls back 20% like it did in the fourth quarter of 2018, and your money's invested in that index fund, well, guess what? It's going to be down 20%.
Right. Plus the fees.
Exactly.
So you're pretty much locking in a underperformance. Almost, I don't like to use this word guarantee, but I mean, you're not going to outperform the index if you're paying an advisor a fee and you're in the index fund. But aside from all of that, the risk part of it is that if you're in a stock that's tanking and it's going to go out of business, then you're in that index fund, you're just going to ride that stock all the way down to zero.
Yep.
So because nobody's actively managing that fund, if there's several stocks in there, and so again, you might have 100 stocks in there, and 20 of them might be going out of business, or we've had a lot of trade concerns with China. Maybe half of the fund is overexposed to China. You're just going to ride that down because nobody's monitoring it. And so that brings up a big case for mutual funds, which there is an active management. But again, we don't like mutual funds because the fees are so high. And so what we've basically created at Falcon Wealth Advisors is we've kind of tried to take the best of both worlds. Because we're not using products, there's no internal fees there that we have to worry about.
Right.
And because of that, we're also able to actively manage it. Now, we're not day trading it. We do buy individual stocks and bonds for our clients. But if a stock is looks like it's going to have a big headwind, we might get out of it, right? We're not going to ride that stock all the way down, right? So the idea is that we want to participate on the upside with the market, but we want to limit our downside. And that's what we're doing for our clients. And so, again, we think that being in a passively invested product is dangerous because, again, people are asleep at the wheel. And if you have volatility, like we certainly have had here lately in the market, you might just be riding this wave all the way back down with nobody watching your money. And that's scary to us.
It is. It's very frightening. And the last point I would add to the risks associated with exchange traded funds that I don't think people always consider or understand. While this might be a little technical, but if you're thinking about the mechanics behind how the fund works, there have been instances that, if anyone's interested, I can point to that show where a fund is designed to mirror an index, but because of some, drastic move in the index or one specific underlying security, what the fund is doing and what the index are doing have become dislocated.
Yeah, that can happen, sure.
Because again, it's a product that's created and it's designed to mirror something, but if there's extreme moves in the market, which we know happen, that can cause it. There could be a time where an index fund or an exchange traded fund designed to mirror an index is down a lot more than the index is down because of the way that the mechanics behind it work. So
right.
I digress.
So why do you think they're so popular?
Well, I believe because over the last 10 years, generally speaking, the market's done pretty well. Really since the financial crisis.
Since 2009,
right?
Isn't it up over 300%?
Yeah, it's done very well. So the idea is actively managed mutual funds.
Or around 300. I don't know if it's...
I think it's more than that now, believe it or not. But either way, I think because of the fact that the market has been up over the last decade or so. Two, people point to the fact that the majority of mutual funds have actually underperformed the benchmarks they're being measured against after the fees that they charge. And then three, the fact that those exchange-traded funds are very low cost. So people feel like, well, if the market's doing as well as it is, I can just buy the market,
right.
And I can do it very cost-effectively, and I can ride this, and I don't need to pay some expensive fees to, a mutual fund that's, if history is an indicator, has underperformed what that low-cost fund has done.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think an exchange-traded fund or ETF makes sense for somebody just starting out.
Sure.
Because again, our clients are typically, they typically have a little larger nest egg than probably your average American. So I think if you're, maybe you're in your 20s or your 30s and you're just building up your nest egg, maybe you don't have enough money to buy out individual stocks and bonds outright. Mm-hmm. And the next fund may make sense. But again, we would look to maybe start, you start in that, and it is risky. But then as the portfolio grows, then you diversify out into stocks and bonds and get a little bit more protected. So typically, if somebody has less than $50,000, I think an exchange traded fund may make sense. But after that, I would get out of them completely and go into stocks and bonds because again, you don't want to probably do this on your own.
Right.
If you're going to be in stocks and bonds, you want to work with a competent advisor. I mean, we have an investment analyst on our team. Many teams don't have that. He's full-time looking at stocks and bonds for our clients. That's all his job is. He doesn't have any clients. He's just in there doing research and helping us make good decisions.
Yep.
And I think that's why a lot of advisors don't do it. They have typically the advisor, maybe some sort of support staff to help open accounts, and that's typically it. So they haven't taken the time to hire smart people around them that can actually manage a portfolio. And that's what we're doing that's, again, quite a bit different.
Exactly.
All right, perfect. So into our third section here, we like to talk about common questions or questions worth asking. So I'll let you start. Why don't you ask me a question that maybe you've heard recently from a client?
I've got one for you. And it is, the question that they asked me was, at what point in time in my retirement is it realistic for me to expect my cost of living or my expenses to go down?
Okay. So this person has already retired.
Within the last 2 or 3 years.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So they're enjoying retirement. They said, am I ever going to spend less money than I do now? And, in our financial plans, we typically don't factor for that. We typically factor for some sort of cost of living adjustment on the upside. But what we've seen, and I think you've written some blogs about this, is that there's the go-go years, right when you retire. You're in your 50s and 60s typically. You're healthy and you're active and you're taking some of those big vacations and you are actually typically going to spend a little bit more. Mm-hmm. Then you've got your slow-go years. Those go into the 60s, 70s. You kind of checked off all of the big trips that you've wanted to do. Now it's really just about enjoying time with your family, maybe taking some more domestic trips. And then the no-go years, where again, you're not getting out as much, probably a lot of doctor's appointments, maybe some assisted living, which can be expensive. And so I would say, to answer that question, probably in the slow-go years is when that spending would start to decrease. So probably as people get into their 70s, again, they probably don't need much help medically at this point, but they're also not out there traveling the world. That's what I've seen. Again, every single client is different.
Very situational.
People are going to spend more or less depending on what's going on in their lives. But from what I've seen, people typically start to slow down their spending at least a little bit in their 70s, and then it might start to tick up again as they approach their 80s and 90s and may need a little bit more medical assistance with the day-to-day living. Is that how you answered it?
It's pretty close. The only things that I added to that is, one, we have clients that retire. It's not, a mortal sin to retire with a mortgage, right? We have some clients that do retire with a mortgage that eventually gets paid off in retirement.
That's a good one, yeah.
And the other piece of it is, what I've found, and I'm sure you probably have too, is some people earlier in retirement might still have family members that they're supporting financially.
Sure.
Could be parents, could be children.
Right.
And again, it's hard to know necessarily how long that's going to last, but, in theory, it isn't going to be a permanent cost.
Okay. Perfect. Very good question. Very popular. I've got one. I think I just addressed this yesterday. So a client is buying a new truck. Mm-hmm. They drive their vehicles for a long time, and they asked me they can get around 3% from their credit union. So they asked me, should we just pull out the money and pay for it, or should we borrow the money and make payments?
From a strictly a financial standpoint, I don't know exactly how their money is invested, but I assume that
their target return is, I think, around, let's just say 6%.
I was going to assume it was higher than 3%. So
right.
The idea there is if their money that's invested is invested as such that we're targeting a return that's 6% versus borrowing the money that costs 3% to borrow, it would make sense to borrow the money from a financial standpoint. Secondly, it would be considering what type of account the money is invested into. For instance,
right, it's an IRA.
If it's in a retirement account and you need $40,000 or $50,000 to pay for a truck, you might need to pull $50,000 or $60,000 or more.
No, the truck was $50,000.
Okay, yeah. So you might be looking at.
Did I say that? The truck's $50,000, I think.
You might, yes.
So,
either way, you might have to pull
$60,000
or $70,000 out of an IRA to net out $50,000 when you could have borrowed money at 3%. And even if you needed to take a little bit more money monthly from your retirement account to make payments because you financed it, that would still probably, assuming the person was comfortable with it, still make pretty good sense.
Yep, exactly. Now, in some cases, they can afford that. Right. So it's also, it's a comfort level. It's like, look, I've got $2 million. I want to pull out $50,000. Maybe they're taking a small draw from their account.
Yep.
At that point, we can run the numbers and say, hey, if you'd rather just pay cash for it because that's how you're used to buying your vehicles, then so be it. But typically, again, we're going to give you the mathematical answer first, and then we're going to talk about what makes you feel good or not. And then if that doesn't make you feel good, then we'll run the numbers and figure out what does.
Yep.
And we'll go down that road together.
That's good.
I kind of gave you an easy one.
Well, it was.
Maybe I'll give you a hard one next week. Okay.
We'll see what you come up with.
Okay, so for our fun global topic, and I think you're going to go out and write a blog about this, but, you and I have been, partners for about 8 or 9 years now?
Over 9 years.
Yeah, and so we've helped, a lot of people retire. We've helped probably hundreds of people plan for retirement. And so as a result of retirement, one of the fun parts of it is planning your retirement party.
That's right.
And so we wanted to talk about some essentials to consider when you are looking to plan a retirement party for yourself, or maybe this is for somebody else, a loved one that you're doing. So maybe do you have a few tips as far as some things that we've seen go well when we're looking at retirement parties?
Yes. So first, I'm going to approach this as if I was planning somebody else's retirement party. One would be understanding what the person who's retiring is comfortable with. Meaning if it's maybe they want to have something at their office for their coworkers, maybe they want to have, coffee with coworkers. Maybe somebody wants to have a happy hour and a little bit more of a party one day after work where they're having coworkers and family and friends. But I think first off is understanding what that person's comfortable with and what it is that they're looking for, which seems fairly obvious, but it's something to consider. Secondly, I think I went to a retirement party very recently that was incredibly well done, in my opinion. It was at a client who retired son's house.
Okay.
But they kind of had a sort of a fiesta theme to it. So in terms of the food that they served, drinks, etc., all of that they
Did they have a piñata?
They did not.
I'm a huge fan of a piñata. Mm-hmm. That's just my deal. When I was single, I used to throw parties.
I mean, I suppose maybe they broke one out after I left, but I don't think so.
I think a piñata is a pretty good essential to consider.
Yeah, that's fine.
If that's your thing.
Here's, so I think sort of having...
Maybe you could put your old boss as a piñata.
That's a thought.
Or your company name.
Yeah.
Right? There's all kinds of fun you could have with that.
That's a thought. I think pictures go over very well, whether it's an environment where you can have a slideshow.
That's a
Especially,
good idea.
childhood pictures always go over well with people if they're stuff from work, as long as it's not going to make the person feel embarrassed, unless I suppose that's your goal, but it probably isn't. Or even, having some kind of, picture board. And then an interesting idea that I read about that I haven't actually seen done, but I really like. This is more of an idea, I guess, than an essential. But if somebody was having a retirement party, I read about somebody having basically a bucket list where everybody that attended the party was given a note card, and they were to write something down that they would suggest that person do.
That's a good
and then
idea.
they put it into a bucket, and then they sign their name. So that person would kind of have the memory of everyone who was there. Like, this is what they thought I should do after I, caught up on sleep and took the vacation I wanted to take. And
Like
let
go
the
to
dust
Hawaii.
settle. Exactly.
Or you need to go, visit New York City or go to Europe, right? Interesting.
Yeah, I thought that was kind of a fun idea.
That is a good idea.
And then the last thing I would add is a retirement gift, right? So if I
Yeah,
was,
what's a good retirement gift?
it depends, obviously, like anything, I suppose. But I think that, like a cake is great, sure, right? But the idea is if you want to give someone a gift, particularly something meaningful, if you were throwing a party and you were able to have everyone who's going to be present contribute, I think something that would be really neat is, if someone is a fisherman, to buy them buy them some nice, fishing gear. Or, even if it was a weekend away at a local resort or something like that, and have everybody chip in and contribute, I think that would go a long way. That might be meaningful to someone if a nice gift that they received that everybody contributed to, pertained to what it is that they like to do.
Interesting. So golf clubs, maybe, if they're a golfer.
Yep. Or even a nice new driver, golf lessons, all of that kind of stuff. If somebody said, when I retire, I absolutely want to play more golf, buy a package of golf lessons.
Yeah, that's pretty neat. Or we've done luggage tags for
Yep.
clients. So if you're
We're gonna
looking just
travel
for a
more.
one gift, if you don't know
Yeah.
everybody going to the party,
Yeah, good point.
luggage tags are pretty cool. Maybe obviously a bottle of wine's a pretty classy thing.
Of course.
To always give. Also, as far as my feedback,
Yeah.
I would say some of the best retirement parties I've been to also have been. I remember one was a lot of fun. Was at their house.
Yep.
And so it's just more laid back. It felt just more family oriented, and I thought that was really cool. I've done them at restaurants too, which is nice. It's nice to have somebody there to clean up, so people can kind of all go to some place.
Right.
If you don't want people in your house,
Sure.
in there. So restaurants are usually pretty good. I would make sure that maybe the restaurant has a private room.
Yes.
That way you can make it a little bit more intimate. I would make sure that there's maybe a microphone. That way if people wanted
Yes.
to give speeches. I think a roast is always kind of fun.
Yeah, okay.
So you could roast the person, which would be kind of cool. In there also. So again,
Humor is fun.
yeah,
Makes
so
it a big
it's
part.
an exciting part. Now, not everybody does them either. I know companies used to give money to help people plan these retirement parties. They've even done them at union halls before. But I think since then, corporations have kind of pulled back on that a little bit. So with our clients, we're of course happy to chip in and help co-sponsor those. We love celebrating that moment
Absolutely.
with our clients. And again, you're going to do some more research and be on the lookout. Corey will be publishing a blog here.
I will.
So if you missed any of this, he'll have it all in writing for you, maybe a checklist or something to think about when planning your retirement party.
Yep.
All right, perfect. So that's all the time that we have for today. We want to thank you, as always, for checking out our video. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's Upticks. We've kind of taken the Falcon Wealth Advisors off of it and put it, used our podcast name. So it's Upticks, a financial planning and investment podcast. So you can find us on iTunes, Spotify, I believe. Again, we're on YouTube. Also, you can follow us on all the various social media platforms. So we're on Instagram, Facebook, we're on Twitter, and LinkedIn certainly. And you can find me personally on Twitter if you're on there at Jake Falcon CRPC.
And you can find me at Corey Bittner KC.
Thanks again for tuning in. We hope you all have a great week.